Thanks for watching The Thought Criminals, named after the resistance to the totalitarian thought police of George Orwell's 1984, which we now refer to as being woke. I'm your host, Rachel Alexander. I'm a weekly contributor to Townhall and other sites and the editor of Intellectual Conservative. And this is my mall, Ralph Benko, who worked in or with the Reagan, W. Bush, and Trump White Houses. He's a weekly columnist for Newsmax, co-author of the Capitalist Manifesto, and co-founder and executive chairman of the 185,000 member Capitalist League Facebook group. Today, we're going to talk to you about student loans, a very hot topic in the news right now, since Democrats and Biden say they want student loan forgiveness. And then we're going to pivot to Ralph's advice for the Biden administration on curbing inflation. So I wrote an article this past week about student loan forgiveness because I felt I had to. I'm one of the many millions, is it 55 million unlucky people out there with student loan debt that I cannot afford. And my situation is definitely sad. The left came after me and they destroyed my license to practice law. So I can't even earn a high income as a lawyer anymore. But despite how sad my own personal story is, I don't think the American taxpayers are responsible for that, because not only is it bad policy, but there are far more sad people out there. If we're going to, all turn into Santa Claus helping out other people, forcing some to pay for others is basically what it's doing, the redistribution of wealth. There are far more sympathetic people than me, like cancer victims, for example, people who have spent all their money on medical bills that they can't afford, and now they're very sick. It's difficult for them to make a living. I could have gotten sick and gone on disability, but I didn't do it, and there's a lot of people out there who they're just trying to, make it work, and they might have cancer. And so where's the forgiveness for them? But, a lot of it really does come down to it's bad policy.
Wait, hold on a second. You've confused me, which is easily done since you have a nosebleed level IQ and I don't. But are you calling for compassionate release of student loans for people who have severe challenges that are not a matter of misbehavior or irresponsibility on their part? Because it sounds to me like you just said, where's the forgiveness for cancer victims who are struggling with student loan debt? So are you?
No, I didn't.
Are you calling for that? Because that's a needs-based or a circumstances-based forgiveness or partial forgiveness program is interesting, and I'd be open to entertaining it. So I just want to know if that's what you're proposing, or whether that's a straw man to say we shouldn't forgive anybody's debt.
Yeah, the latter. Okay, first of all, you're confusing two things. I'm not proposing loan forgiveness for people who have cancer, even because that's already there. If you already are severely ill, you can go get your student loans forgiven in drastic circumstances. So that's already there. I'm talking about just plain old cancer victims who don't have student loans, but they've got medical bills. So I'm saying if we're going to forgive anyone, that would come first. But again, I don't like having the government come in and redistribute wealth. I think there are many other ways people can do GoFundMes. Their churches can help them.
No. Come on. I've known people. A friend of mine ended up falling down, knocking his eye out. Okay, and literally, he didn't have health insurance. He ended up with huge bills. He opened up he's a very popular guy. He opened up a GoFundMe account and he raised something like $3,000 against a $300,000 medical bill. So let's not be facile about it. Number one, churches. Hey, I love Christians. I'm a Christianophile. Okay, as a Jew, I'm proud of our daughter Faith and the immense amounts of good it has done in the world over thousands of years. Yay, Christianity. Okay, but I also know tons of Christians. And no matter how kind they are, and they tend to be kind, no matter how compassionate they are, and they tend to be compassionate, they don't have the resources very few of them, even mega churches, don't have the resources to provide for help for people who've gotten into truly catastrophic situations. They might be
fair enough. Okay, but for
be thoughtful about it. But let me tell you where to find. Let me tell you how to do this right.
No. I want to refute you first, and then you can tell me what's right. Okay. For every one of your friend who lost his eye, I can point out almost every other single American out there has some sad story where they could justify robbing Peter to pay Paul. And where do we drop the buck?
Wait a minute.
Everyone I know has a sad story.
Wait a minute.
Use some bailing out.
I was simply saying, I was using my buddy as an example of why GoFundMe isn't the solution. Okay,
it's one of many solutions. It might not necessarily be the solution for everybody, but there are plenty of other solutions other than robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Unless Peter is a Democrat and Paul is a Republican, I'm against robbing Peter to pay Paul. Okay, if Peter is a Democrat and Paul's a Republican, I'm for robbing Peter to pay Paul. Yes, haha. So look, here's the thing. There's a couple of moral hazards here that you are overlooking. And I just want to bring them to the fore. Maybe they represent a solution, maybe they don't. Okay. Federally guaranteed, what people don't know about student loans, people don't think about, they know about it, it's just not top of mind, is what they're leaving out is the federally guaranteed student loans. Okay, and the perverse part of federally guaranteed student loans is you cannot discharge them in bankruptcy, unlike normal loans. Okay, if you get in over your head,
exception of severe circumstances, correct?
Yeah, except for in extraordinary circumstances. If you get if people are silly enough to lend you enough money to get you head over heels in debt, you can discharge that in a reorganization, in a Chapter 11 or Chapter 13 reorganization. That's not true for federally guaranteed student loans. You are stuck for life. You are a debt slave. And that is just—
but that is drastic, and you're not even going in. No, that's not reality. The reality is there are all these income-based repayment programs where you can get in and out in 10 years. There's also the fact that, Biden has put on hold perpetually any repayments. No one's had to make a payment on their student loan since March 2020. And finally, even if you do go into default on your student loans, it's rare that they actually come after you.
It's a mess. And I'm just saying that the system is a mess. But let me make, you interrupted me during the windup. Let me make the pitch. Do you know who the bad guys are here? The real bad guys that we should go after?
The reason people don't understand it is because it's very complex. There are multiple players in here that are abusing the system.
And I'm going to simplify it. Do you know who the real bad guys are here, who we should go after, loot their endowments, and use that money on a means-tested basis to help people who got suckered into taking out non-dischargeable student loans and are now over their head in debt? Like you. Who should we go after? Who is Qui Bueno here? Who benefited from this horrible federal guarantee?
My guess is you're going to say the universities.
The universities, good guess. Okay, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, they're sitting on these multi-billion-dollar endowments because they were able to get this subsidized money, number one. And number two, when I went to college, and now before the great inflation, which we'll segue to in a minute, okay, it was $2,000 a year. It's tuition, room and board, maybe $2,500. And I went to a very elite college. Okay, since then, colleges have loaded up with provosts and administrators and all kinds of non-teaching bureaucrats that get paid ridiculous amounts of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, to be paper pushers. Okay, the collegiate and university system has gone off the deep end to become parasites on the educational system. And really, hey, I'm okay. I'd be okay with taking away their tax exempt status and taxing the multi-billion dollar endowments they have and giving that money back to people like you to get them either to ameliorate their student debt or get them out of student debt on a case-by-case merit-based solution, because the universities and the colleges have just been sucking suckers like you and me, not me so much because my parents put aside a college fund, and college was very inexpensive way back in the 1970s when I went there. The education, educracy, okay, has been bleeding innocent people like you dry to create these multi-billion dollar endowments that they don't recycle to fund worthy people like you
Well,
to
I
be
do think I'm
educated.
worthy, but I wouldn't go so far as to say I'm innocent. I knew what I was getting into. But maybe this is where we have the common ground between you and me, Ralph, which is our friend Mark Brnovich, the Arizona Attorney General, is sued ASU because they increased their tuition by over 300% over just a few years. But the problem is you have all these powerful Democrat-controlled law firms like Snell and Wilmer, which are fighting his lawsuits in court and getting them dismissed, so he can't make any ground against them. And also, if we did forgive innocent people like me, what about all the innocent people like me that come after me? All the students who are going to continue.
Oh no, we need to reform the system. There should be no federally guaranteed student loans. Okay, it's a moral hazard. And it's creating debt slaves. And it's just, even if they don't come after you very often, it creates a threat, a sort of Damocles over you. Okay, we need to completely reform the system. But the way, I don't think but I'm absolutely opposed to either borrowing money from the general fund, treasury bills, increasing the deficit, or sticking the average working Joe and Jill taxpayer, the middle class and the working people with the tab. I say we go over the real perps and the real fat cats, and that is the tax exempt universities who have gone on a complete parasitical bender. Right now they're tax exempt, but you yourself told us the story about how they're abusing their tax exemption to create things like conference centers that they don't get to use, but they get to lease out to for-profit entities and take them out of the tax base. Okay, the university system and the collegiate system is, and by the way, I'm all for higher education. I'm all about human capital, but this is a perverted system. We need to make taxpayers out of these people, add them back into the real economy, use those funds to help out legitimate people like you on a merit-based basis and on a moral-based basis, not just buying votes with it. And I'm not seeing this very good, morally just solution being proposed either by most Republicans or by any Democrats. It's just a few heroes, the few people of real integrity like Brnovich, who are willing to go out there and fight. And so to me, the low-hanging fruit here, we're gonna have to work for it. Everything's gonna be a fight, but nominate Mark Brnovich for the United States Senate, and then elect him to the United States Senate and let him be an epic leader for truth, justice, and the American way by taking these loopholes out of the system called the universities, bringing them back into the tax base, making them reform their administrative structure so they don't have a bunch of paper pushing parasite bureaucrats who are sucking people like you dry. And then that's who I want to go after. I am totally totally in agreement with you. We should not be either raising taxes on working people, on the middle class. We should certainly not be raising taxes on our children and our grandchildren by compounding the national debt to do it. We should be closing the loopholes of the university system, and we should be using the money for that to help to create a more humane and a more intelligent system whereby people like you are not being put into a state of threat, of menace, because of this highly perverse, highly wrong, corrupt student loan, federally guaranteed student loan system that is only going to benefit the universities. It is not going to benefit most people.
And let me just point out as well, Biden says he supports $10,000 per student loan debt. That's it. For most of us who, are floundering in student loan debt, that's why even bother? I owe over $75,000. It keeps piling up with more interest. $10,000 is nothing. You're not helping people. I think the Democrats are doing this because it gets votes. There's 55 million people out there with student loan debt they can't pay, and there's only 255 million people in the rest of the country. So it's almost 20% of the country. It's a good gamble for them to get votes, and I think that's all it comes down to.
I'm shocked to find gambling going on in this facility, as the line goes from Casablanca. But let me tell you, let me just shift here. We've got a few minutes left, and to the long-term solution. Okay, because what I've talked about is rectifying the university loophole and using that to ameliorate the problem. But that is a Band-Aid where we really need a systemic solution. The systemic solution is getting economic growth back up to the 4% range that we enjoyed under Reagan and we enjoyed under William Jefferson Clinton. Okay, if right now under George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and Donald Trump, we had punk economic growth for a generation, 20 years. We were growing at around 2% instead of the Reagan-Clinton 4%. Now, the difference between 4% and 2% may not sound like much, but as Albert Einstein famously never said, the strongest force in the universe is compound interest. So when you compound that differential, that 2% shortfall a year over 20 years, that means I'm making, average people are making, most workers are making 50% less than they would be making, because 2% a year over 20 years compounded is 50%. So let's just say you're making $60,000 a year. I don't mean you personally, our listeners making $60,000 a year. Okay, if the economic growth rate had been growing at supply side rates, normal supply side rates of 4% rather than 2%, they'd be making $90,000 a year instead of $60,000 a year. If they're making $100,000 a year, they'd be making $150,000 a year. And you know what that does? That gives them enough prosperity to pay off their student loans. You've got $75,000 in student loans. If you were making $30,000 a year more than you're making now, you could pay, even after taxes, you could pay that off completely in 3 years. Okay, the way to do that is to be getting economic growth back up to its supply side rates. And unfortunately, neither the Republicans nor the Democrats are proposing the well-known ways of doing that.
Are you editing your column now?
I'm sorry? Yes. And promoting my column, which is to say, look, inflation is one of the worst things for economic growth. It's a tax on, it's a surreptitious wealth tax. And we know, having lived through it, that inflation is caused by the Fed, money printer go burr, the Fed overprinting money. Donald Trump was slamming Jay Powell for not for keeping interest rates too high and for not weakening the dollar. We all know that it takes about 1 to 2 years for the Fed's pumping the money supply to turn into inflation. The inflation we're experiencing right now is not because of greedy big business, Mr. Biden. It's not because of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. This inflation happened way before this invasion. It's not because of COVID-related supply chain problems. They're real, but they're not the cause of inflation.
But you could say it's a reaction to COVID is why they pump money into the economy.
Yes, but whatever the reason that they pumped money so hard, Trump was pushing them to sink the dollar. I write about it in my column very aggressively long before COVID. Okay, so he was a weak dollar guy, and he was proud of it. Now he didn't know, he's no economist, that this would lead to inflation, or I'm sure he wouldn't have done it. And Biden's not off the hook because he just reappointed Jay Powell.
Well, what do you think? I want to hear what you think of how they're aggressively raising interest rates now. A half a point here, half a point next month, June, July, whatever. What do you think about that?
I think that they're playing with fire, because you definitely need to recalibrate the money supply. Okay, but you need to do it with finesse in a way that will not produce a whopping recession, which is the fire they're playing with. There's only one way that has consistently worked to keep the money supply constrained without causing an inflation, and without causing a recession, and it's called the classical gold standard. Nobody's talking about this. Except me. Republicans aren't talking about this, me and Steve Forbes. The Republicans aren't talking about this. The Democrats aren't talking about this. So I'm very pessimistic. I'm afraid that we're either going to be continuing to have horrible stagflation or even an out and out recession, because they are just botching monetary policy. Okay, they are absolutely botching monetary policy, the Republicans and the Democrats. And so I wrote a column for Joe Biden, drawing on the sign that was on Harry Truman's desk, saying the buck stops here. And so Joe Biden needs to basically tell the Fed to constrain monetary growth so that it's non-inflationary, but not constrain it to the point where it becomes recessionary. That's the solution. I'm desperately afraid that Mr. Biden was out to lunch the day I published my column and may not have read it. So he, unfortunately, this very good guy may not know what to do. And if he, no matter how good a guy he is, okay, if he doesn't know what to do, you got to do the right thing, but you got to do the thing right. And I'm very nervous about the economy going into in this midterms year, and I'm afraid that Joe Biden has shot himself in the foot, politically speaking.
This doesn't consider you one of his advisors, and I have to ask you, Ralph. You said, okay, well, people like Karl Rove are strategically thinking, tell the Democrats to move to the left, thinking it'll help trounce them in the midterms. Well, don't you say that that kind of policy doesn't affect inflation? So even if the Democrats ran to the left,
it does other bad things. Okay, and plus the American people are center right, as Joe Manchin has pointed out. And so they're moving to the left is just crippling them, and they're going to have a catastrophe. Newt Gingrich, not one of my favorite people, but no dummy, just said that we may turn over 70 seats Republican in the midterms. Okay, the Democrats are committing political suicide with all of their moving further. The Elizabeth Warren move further left, faster, harder. Okay, that's bad, but it's the inflation, stupid. If Joe Biden would enact a stable dollar policy, a la Paul Volcker, that would bring inflation under control, okay, that would be a very good thing for him to do. I just don't see any sign of him doing it. And there's a lot of other things. He wants to spend like a drunken sailor. Luckily, Joe Manchin is preventing him from doing that. He wants to raise taxes in whopping, ridiculous ways, like a wealth tax. Okay, this is really bad. There aren't enough wealthy people to balance the budget. And we all know that eventually he's going to turn around and say, well, okay, we're going to raise taxes on the middle class too. The American people don't want higher taxes. They don't want profligate spending, and they certainly don't want inflation. And the Democratic Party, which I'm afraid to say their progressive wing, their hard left wing, has taken
Bond AOC wing.
my beloved AOC wing has, I'm sad to say, taken Joe Biden political hostage. And unfortunately, this is not going to end well for the Democratic Party. And by the way, I would love to see the Democratic Party go the way of the Whigs, except for I'm afraid that without a high functioning Democratic Party, which we haven't seen in a long time, okay, the Republicans are going to revert to the mean, which is running errands for Thurston Howell and the Third and Lovey, the country club Republicans. I don't trust the Republicans not to revert to type and become the servants of the country club set, who I have no greater love for than I do for. I like AOC a lot better than I like them. So there you go.
Wow, that's
Either
considering they always do those studies. The most wealthiest members of Congress are always Democrats, but okay.
I know, but all of them, the Republicans and the Democrats both are letting us working people down. And I keep looking for a true leader, somebody with principles, somebody with courage, and somebody with smarts. The whole Wizard of Oz package, brains, heart, and courage, up on Capitol Hill to lead America in the right direction. And the closest I can find to that is Joe Manchin.
Okay, we will just have to agree to disagree about that one. And maybe I should devote a whole show to going over all the left-wing views of Joe Manchin, because to me, he seems just like Kirsten Sinema. You know, they've picked a few high-profile items to disagree with Biden on, and you know, they've been successful. And other than that, 90% of their views are just typical left-wing views.
Well, I got my eye on DeSantis. Okay, he's doing some very interesting things, taking on the left. Very gutsy guy, but in the meantime, my fondest wish is Brnovich for U.S. Senate, because I think he could do a lot of good up there on Capitol Hill.
He good. Let's just bring him in, because right now he's got at least one opponent that just wants to lie and lie and lie about him. He even lied and said that Brnovich was going to show up at a debate, which was not true. Brnovich didn't agree to it. And then when he didn't show up, now everybody's saying Brnovich is a no-show. And he didn't even ask the other guy in the race to debate. It was all a media show.
Instead of the media is all shown, and they're good at it. But instead of denouncing his opponent, can we just close by saying Mark Brnovich has shown true courage, has shown true vision, and has shown true devotion to the public welfare. And I, for one, hope that he will be nominated and elected to the United States Senate in 2022.
Thank you for keeping us glass half full, Ralph. And thank you everybody for watching us. We'll see you next week.
See you next week.